Have ever heard of helicopter parenting? We familiar with this term? It was a term that was coined around 1990, and it's used to describe parents who are a little over-involved in their kids' lives. The reason that it's called helicopter parenting is because they hover. They are super engaged with every aspect of their child's life. There are very little boundaries for helicopter parents. They want to know what their child is doing, who they're with, what they're thinking. But I was doing a little research this week in preparation for my message, and I have found that there is actually a new breed of parent that kind of takes helicoptering to a new level. These parents are called lawnmower parents. Are we familiar? Have you heard of lawnmower parents? There are a couple famous lawnmower parents in the news recently with their kids and a scandal about getting into colleges that they shouldn't have been in. Lawnmower parents are really described best by wanting to protect their kids from any form of struggle or adversity or challenge, so they just go before them and they mow down anything in their path. They don't prepare their kids for adversity. They take the adversity away from them and shield them. These are lawnmower parents. Now, it's funny, kind of, unless it's you. And you are usually the last one to realize that it's you. It's so much easier to look at somebody else's life and see their need for control, to micromanage the events of their lives. It's so much easier to see other people's stuff than it is our own. But I would imagine if we were honest with ourselves, be it our kids or some other aspect of our lives, that there are certain places in our lives where we desperately need to control things to turn out the way that we want them to be. Now, I thought it would be good getting started to introduce you to a little girl. Some of you may have seen her. I'm not sure exactly what parenting style her parents are giving her, but what I want to do is introduce you to a little girl who teaches us that control begins in the very earliest stages of our lives. So take a look at our little friend and then we'll get going.
You in jail and time out.
Well, let me tell you this, Linda.
My name ain't Linda. So you sit right there and time out, little bad little girl.
No, let me tell you something.
No,
If
don't say
I wasn't here, I would surely take a day off from you and then a day off from these kids. I'm around the classroom. I'm just done with you.
I'm done with you too, but you in time out.
Oh, let me tell you something, honey. This is not
You're gonna be in time out.
Oh,
That's why you in time out right
I
now.
think so.
I think so.
Well, when I get up out of town and go to bed, I will be glad to go home and enjoy the rest of my life.
She would be fun to have in the household, wouldn't she? Somebody's teaching her something. It's funny. I mean, we laugh at her, but I think sometimes it's important to look at our lives and kind of step back and laugh at ourselves a little bit. I want you, as we're getting started, we've been in this series called Crossroads, and we've been talking about the importance of when we come to these places where we make decisions, these crossroads of going one way or another, how if we make a certain decision, it will begin to chart a course for where we're headed. Usually the first step in a direction is the most difficult. Every other one after that then sort of becomes easier and easier to follow. And so today we're going to talk about the crossroads of holding on or letting go. We're going to talk about the importance, the critical nature of surrender in the life of anyone who considers their Christian faith and takes it seriously at all. Now, I want you just for a moment to get in touch with this idea of our need for control. So, on one end of the spectrum are control freaks, those who just are trying to micromanage every aspect of their life, and yours too. And then on the other end, those people who seem not to have a lot of care and concern about that. There's just sort of a whimsical nature with the way in which they approach their life, and they're easy come, easy go kind of people. I would say that most of the population probably hovers around the middle to the other end of the spectrum, where there's at least something in their life that they are so concerned about that control is an important deal for them. How many of you guys, if you were just honest, would say that control is a pretty important issue for me sometimes? Okay? So I just want you to think about why that is. Okay? I want you to get in touch with, perhaps there's something that's going on in your life that you're trying to bend the will, and you're trying to even solicit God's help, but you're hoping to get to some place that ultimately you don't control and you can't control, but it hasn't stopped you from trying. Right? Control is oftentimes an illusion. I remember when my mother and my brother passed away consecutively within a year, and I just felt like my world was sort of spiraling. And I went into this place of just darkness and sadness. And I remember feeling like the world was just unsafe and it was uncertain. And really that's what drives our need for control, is our desire for safety, for certainty, for security. And behind that need is the fear that we won't get it. Fear is always pushing at that, and so we try to control. And I just remember thinking to myself, at that time, my kids were very young, and the idea of them listening to me was a struggle, because kids really don't do that very well in their youngest ages. And I just remember thinking to myself, I just want to put something somewhere and nobody else touch it, because that is representative to me of how little control I have. I wanted to put something, to say something, to do something that in some way wouldn't get moved, changed, fixed, broken, taken. And I think probably if we're looking at and listening to our lives very closely, I think there's probably something going on that we desire the same for. Because the truth of the matter is, the reason that we try to control things is because we think it will bring us peace of mind. But it's actually the opposite. Peace of mind doesn't come when we control a situation. Peace of mind comes when we realize we don't need to control a situation. And so I think our pursuit of trying to do so actually increases the intensity and the anxiety and the worry in our lives. And so what I want us to talk about today, what I want us to learn from today, is this picture, this image of Jesus as he goes to spend some time. It's the final hours of his life. It's a Thursday evening, and the next day, Friday, he will be crucified. His life will be taken from him. He will offer his life as a sacrifice on behalf of everyone everywhere, of all for all time. Now, he's just shared a meal with his closest friends, and during that meal, he has said to this group of 12, one of you will betray me. One of you will deny me. And the rest of you, when I need you the most, will totally abandon me. And yet, I have eagerly desired to spend this time with you. And so they can't get it. Over the last several weeks, I've been telling you, there are 3 separate occasions where Jesus tells his closest friends, here's what's coming. The first time, if you weren't with us, the very first time, one of them tried to argue him out of it. And he basically said, you and I were not aligned with the same things. The things that you're asking for are the exact opposite of what's going to happen. And he said to Peter, get behind me, Satan. The second time, he tells his closest friends that's going to happen, that he's going to be betrayed, he's going to be denied, he's going to be crucified, he's going to die, and then 3 days later be raised. They have a side conversation about which of them is greatest. So they can't handle the intensity of what he's sharing with them. So one tries to talk him out of it. The others just go off and have a discussion that's totally unrelated. And now he has this discussion with them again, and they just can't handle the weight of it. So what happens is they leave this place in Jerusalem, they cross the Kidron Valley, and they go up the side of the Mount of Olives to this garden, a garden that's about a half-mile west of the Temple Mount. Okay? And as they get in this place, it's late at night, they're in this garden, Garden of Gethsemane, olive press garden. And Jesus says to the 11, because by this time one of them has left. Judas has left the company of the 12, and he has set in motion the process of his betrayal. So there's 11 of them with him now. When they get to the outskirts of the garden, he says to 8 of them, he says, I want you to stay here. I'm going to go a little deeper into the garden, and I'm going to invite 3 of you to come with me. And that's Peter, James, and John. As they go with him, he asked them at a certain point, he said, I'm now going to go a little further, but I want you to stay here, and I want you to watch with me, and I want you to wait with me. And he said, my soul is crushed. It's grieved to the point of death. I want you just for a moment to get in touch with this Jesus. Because the Jesus of the Gospels, most of the time when you look at him, is helping to relieve suffering. He's helping to provide resources for those who don't have it. He's walking on water. He's opening blind eyes. He's opening deaf ears. He's raising people from the dead. He is doing things that would make him look like Superman, like he's not vulnerable in any way to the kind of emotions that have now overwhelmed him. But he said, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. His disciples have never seen him like this. And they have to be freaking out too, because he's been their center. He's been their bedrock. He's been the one when they've been freaking out that they could go to. And now he is in intense anguish. And maybe he's pacing and maybe he's wringing his hands, but he's in the spot that he doesn't want to be. It's the first and only time we've ever really seen him like this. So I want you to get in touch with this Jesus, because there's something to learn here about when you hit the crossroads of holding on or letting go that's going to be important for you in the places of your life where you need, or you feel you need, to control. And so he says, I'm going to go a little further. I want you guys to watch and wait and pray with me. But this is something only I can do. You've come with me this far, but now it's just between me and my Father. But I need you. It's kind of like, you can't help me here, but I want you here. There's nothing you can really do for me except pray. So would you do that for me? I'm thinking, they probably are thinking, of course, anything that we can do for you. We just want your suffering to stop. We just want your pain to cease. And for all that you've ever done for us, if we could do anything. And he's like, what you could do for me is to watch and to wait. And so he goes a little further into the garden, into the recesses, into the shadows. And he falls on his face. And he's completely undone. He's getting ready to do something that he knows he has to do, but he doesn't want to do. And he wishes he could control it, that he could bend the will of it, the will of his Father, in a different direction. And so what does he do when he begins his prayer? He begs his Father for a different result. And this is the first thing I think we need to understand about the process of surrender. For even the best of us, surrender is painful. It is often accompanied by suffering. And if it were true of Jesus and it happened to Jesus, then there should be some level of expectation when we hit the crossroads where we're confronted with trying to control or bend the will of something or make something happen that we don't see happening, that there is going to be some place of pain where we, in the process of surrendering, are going to experience some level of anguish and some level of loss. And that, of course, is why we resist surrender. That is why we oftentimes cling to desperately and hold on to things and to people, because we don't want to suffer. We don't want to lose. We don't want to experience pain, and so we resist it. We try to micromanage and we try to control our situation and the things in our lives and those who matter to us. We try to control it, and when we realize we can't control it, we try harder. But there is this place that we're going to come to as followers of the one who suffers here, where we're going to have to understand that the power of letting go is so critical for us moving to a place of peace and to a life of freedom. Because surrender lies at the crossroads of a life that is free. And so, the very thing that we cling to, the very thing that we hope will happen, is the very thing that can become the obstacle for our finding what we so desire in prayer, and that is union and communion with God. See, most of us in the earlier stages of our life of faith, we just start where we are, and that is begging God to do for us what we want God to do for us. They're all things, right, that we want in our lives to happen. And it's not a bad thing to start there. In fact, I think it's necessary. I think we have to, when we're struggling in a place where we want something, I think we have to be honest with God about what it is that we want. It may not be what God wants for us, but we start with expressing and opening our hearts to God. And that's what Jesus is doing here. He's begging His Father not to drink this cup of suffering. Now I want you to think about what you're begging God for these days. What you want so desperately to happen in your life. What you need to happen. What you have to have happen in your life. And I want you to put yourself in the place of Jesus. And I want you to ask yourself, when's it going to be time for me to surrender my need for it to happen this way? When am I going to come to the place where I can let it go and entrust it to one who is trustworthy, who is capable, who is more able to handle this situation than what I am? I think we start with intense suffering. But I think if we open it in the presence of God and we invite Him into that space, He meets us. Because the real purpose of prayer is to find union and communion with our Creator. And then, once we have communion with our God, to align our wills with His will. And that is where we find peace. So Jesus begs His Father for a different outcome. And then there's this space, and I don't know how long the distance is between the point of His asking that if the cup of suffering can be removed, that He remove it. But then there's this space. It's this very familiar, very famous space for most of us. And this is where He says, "Yet I want your will to be done, not mine. Yet not my will be done, but your will be done." You read it as one complete kind of sentence. I don't think it happens that way. I think there's a lot of anguish and there's a lot of struggle. In fact, if you look in the other gospel accounts, He will get up from His face, He will go back to the three, and He will find them sleeping on 3 separate occasions. The thing He wanted most, that they watch and wait, every time He gets up and goes back, it's almost like He's taking a break. I'm not ready to say, "Not my will, but yours be done. Let me go talk with my friends." And every time He gets up and goes back, they're sleeping. And He goes back to His place of anguish. He wants help He can't get. And finally, He gets to this place of surrender. And that's the place where He is ultimately able to release His desire for a certain outcome into the hands of the one that loves Him and trusts Him, and He believes and knows this. And so, this is a journey for you and I, because there will come some point, if we are going to align our lives with the Christ life, where we're going to have to learn this practice too. The reason we desperately need, want, desire control is because our world is unsafe. But God is not safe. God is good. But the surroundings, the culture, the environment, we're reminded of this on a daily basis every time we turn on the news or turn on our computers or pick up a paper. We're so reminded of all the things that can and are going wrong, and we so desperately just want utopia. We want a better space, a better life. We want the kingdom of God. It's what our hearts were made for. And one day we will receive, but in between there's just this painful space. This space where we have to determine, are we going to hold on or are we going to let go? Are we going to figure this out and try to bend God's will towards our own, or are we going to trust God in this space? You know this prayer that Jesus prays, right? It's, "Dear God, please take the cancer away. God, please give me a favorable settlement in the court date. Please, God, help my children who are so wayward and lost." It's wanting something so desperately. But it's coming to some place where you are able to say, "Not my will, but yours be done." Now, why would we ever do this? Why would we ever surrender? The Christian surrender doesn't come from a place of fear. It moves from fear. Fear is the reason why we're trying to control and micromanage everything. Christian surrender is about moving towards love. It's about moving towards one that we trust to make of this situation better than what we've been able to. And so when we find ourselves in this space where we just can't let go, what we need to be honest with ourselves about is, this thing is creating more angst than peace. Sometimes people will ask me, like, how do I know when it's time to surrender? How do I know when it's time to let go? Probably when you're getting ulcers. Probably when you're feeling tension in your neck and shoulders and back. Probably when you can't sleep. Probably when you're wrestling and wrangling and you find no peace. If you could create peace by controlling the environment, then of course you would, but it's exactly the opposite that happens. And why is it that this is true? The reason that controlling or trying to micromanage our lives, the reason why it results in so little peace is because it puts us out of alignment with the will of God. God may well want what you want and will what you will, but God may well not. And the only way to find out is to hold things loosely. There's a prayer that our elders often pray when we're making decisions. It's called the prayer of indifference. We want to become indifferent to anything other than the will of God in making that choice. And so sometimes we just have to realize that there are things that stand in the way, and we have to offer those. Let those go so that we can align ourselves with the will of God. That's the purpose of real, true, deep, and meaningful prayer. Union with God, alignment with God. And then what happens is, when you release control, you find peace, because peace comes when you don't need control. Peace comes when you can trust one that is greater than you, who has a plan and a purpose and a will for your life, to work that out to its good purposes. So, suffering is part of the process of surrender. But let it not keep you from continuing on the path, because the path of surrender leads us to freedom and it leads us to peace. Now, how do we do this? I'm so glad you asked. I mean, really, when you think about it, it's like, okay, well, in theory, okay, I get that surrender is an important part of the process of of aligning my life with God, of receiving His favor and joining Him in His good purposes for my life, but I don't even really know how to do it. I don't know how to do it. When I'm praying, there are just so many things that I want. I don't know how to let go of this stuff because I want what I want, right? In your bulletins, I gave you a copy of one of the best tools I know for learning how to surrender. If you don't have a bulletin when you're leaving out, please pick one up because this will be worth the price of admission for you. So I want to walk you through this prayer and then we'll close. Our team's going to come back up and I'm going to ask you to just think about like where you are in your life with issues of control and what it is perhaps today that you just need to surrender. What it is that you need to say to God, I don't want this, or I really want this, but let not my will be done, let thy will be done. So before you pray this prayer, I think it's important that you create a quiet space where for 2 or 3 minutes you just sit or walk or wherever you are, but find a quiet space. And just let the events of your day to settle. If you start in the morning, you'll have less going on in your mind. But at whatever point in the day that you find yourself, you begin by welcoming God. You say, welcome, 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 God. And then you say, I welcome everything that comes to me in this moment because I know that it's for my healing. This is an acknowledgement that God can use and will use all things. So you're not resisting anything. You're just welcoming all things. I welcome all thoughts and feelings and emotions and persons and situations and conditions. Now this runs against the fabric of what we normally do because there are certain persons and situations and things that we're often trying to resist. But in God's presence, you're welcoming everything. You're not trying to play defense. You're just you're opening yourself. You're just saying, I welcome all of it. And then the hard part comes, as if that wasn't. The first line goes, I let go of my desire for security. And then you just sit with that. And if you find yourself having a hard time doing that, you sit a little longer with that. And then you make your way to the next. I let go of my desire for approval. And then you sit with that. And then you say to God, I let go of my desire for control. Now this reads easier than it prays. But I just want you to know that you're taking an active stance in the presence of God with surrendering things that we often cling to that prevent our peace. So I let go of the desire for control. The next line, I let go of my desire to change any situation, condition, person, or myself. I let go of all of that. You know how hard that is? And mean it? I mean, you can pray this prayer and like totally check out, right? But like to mean that. I let go of my desire to change my situation, any situation, condition, person, or myself. And then finally, I open to the love and presence of God and to the healing action and grace within. So normally in those 3 or 4 things that you're letting go of, there'll be one that is really difficult. And that's where you're going to want to camp out and spend some time, whether it's approval, whether it's security, whether it's control, whatever the situation may be. But what I'm giving you is a tool to use that is helping you to grow your surrender muscle. Because you cannot take your faith seriously if at some point when you hit this crossroads where you don't act in the way that Jesus acted and do the things that Jesus do. They call us Christ followers for a reason. We follow Christ in His ways. And surrender is a very important, heck, the cross of Christ is central to our faith. It's an act of His surrender that He gave Himself. And so I want you to think about that as we close. You know, we began with talking about helicoptering and lawn mowing parents and little girls who are trying to control situations, and that all is kind of funny unless it applies. But it's not so funny when you're like really wrestling with something that isn't what you want it to be. There's something going on in your life right now, some of you, that just isn't what you want it to be. And you're begging God to change it. And I would beg you to consider letting go of your need to change it. I would beg you to consider what it might mean for you to surrender your need for that. Or there's something that you're wanting to happen, and you've been wanting it to happen for a long time, and it keeps you up at nights. It causes anxiety, it causes great stress. And you just think, if this happens, I know I'd be happy. If only this would happen, I know. And what happens is a lot of times, like, we get there and then we realize it just wasn't what we thought it was. We thought it was going to make us happy, but it really didn't, because then there's something else we've got to control. So I'm going to invite the worship team to come back up. They're going to sing a song, and at some point towards the end they will invite us to join them. But I just want you to think about the stuff in your life that maybe you're trying to control, and it's really doing a number on you. And I want to invite you to consider at this crossroads, to consider what it would mean for you to surrender. And if you need to use that prayer that was in your bulletin that we just walked through, then use that prayer during this time. But I want you to think about that as we finish our time together, okay?